Please, the floor is yours.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me here, and I apologize for being this late, but there was just an accident on I-80, and I knew that I was going to be late at that point. So without much further ado, I think we should get right into it because we are 20 minutes late.
Only 10 minutes late. We start at 10 after.
Oh, why didn't you tell me? I wouldn't have run. Anyways, this talk, as already mentioned, is about virtual reality and how it can be useful for the scientific process at large. And the outline of what I'm going to talk about today is essentially 4 different topics. I want to start out with giving you an introduction of where I'm coming from when I'm talking about virtual reality. So I want to talk a little bit about this KeckCAVES project that's going on at UC Davis right now. And then I'm going to spend a good amount of time of talking about what VR really is, because pretty much everybody who works in VR has their own understanding what it ought to be. So we are going to put on a definition and then see what are really the benefits that we gain from this. And then the next part is, I could also have named that the good, the bad, and the ugly, even though we believe that virtual reality is cool, nobody else thinks so. And we want to investigate why that is and what we can possibly do about it. And our answer to that question, what we can do about it, is then the last part, which is using VR as an analytical tool, really integrating visualization directly into the scientific process, as opposed to doing it just as an afterthought. And because I'm talking about VR, and obviously couldn't bring my inflatable VR environment with me, the next best thing I can do is just show as many movies and demos as I can. So I'm going to intersperse some demos and videos throughout the talk. Okay, let's start by looking at a brief history of KeckCAVES. What is this KeckCAVES thing anyways? KeckCAVES is a project whose mission is to advance the status of Earth science through advanced virtual reality visualization. This is really a collaboration, a very close collaboration between Earth scientists and computer scientists at UC Davis, where we are trying to develop novel approaches to visualization that are very problem-specific for a given application, for, let's say, tectonic, for seismic tomography, for all these things. And the center point of this collaboration, some would say the crystallization seed, is this 4-sided cave VR environment that we have, where we are developing all of our software for. And the manpower, or the person power that is behind KeckCAVES comes really from 3 different institutions at UC Davis. That is, of course, the Department of Geology, who is putting in all the science and all the applications. And then there's researchers from IDEV. IDEV is the new name of CIPIC. It's now the Institute for Data Analysis and Visualization, not anymore the Center for Integrated Computing and Image Processing. Right, that used to be. And the money for all this came from the W.M. Keck Foundation. And so let me show you what this thingy looks like. Here's a couple pictures. On the left, that's our cave with the screensaver on, the logo. So it is a VR environment where you have 4 screens. You have the 3 walls that are projected, and you have the floor that's projected. And by using clever software, you can just put virtual 3-dimensional models in there and interact with them as if they were really there. And then we have a little bit more of equipment. You have these fancy glasses that you have to wear. And the computer tracks these, so it knows where the glasses are, which will come in very handy, as we see in a moment. And then, in order to interact with these programs, we have this one thing. It's like a 3-dimensional mouse, has a bunch of buttons, which is pretty much the main way how persons inside this environment interact with the programs that are going on. And again, we're going to have a very close look at how this actually all works in a moment. And to put this all into context, let me just very briefly go over the history of this relatively new project we've started in April 2005. The idea to do all this came really out of the geosciences, which is very interesting. Normally, the development or installation of VR environments usually gets pushed from inside the computer science departments. Here it was really the opposite. We had some geologists who really believed that they were stuck at a particular point in their research and they couldn't go any farther without using advanced visualization. So they proposed to the Keck Foundation to build this KeckCAVES facility. And then very early on, they realized that they didn't really have all the expertise that's needed for doing that, so they started talking to researchers from IDEV who joined them in the very early stages of the project, and then we have been working with them, developing software ever since. Now, very early on, of course, before we even had the cave, we walked around and visited all the other institutions that had VR environments, that had caves, and talked to all of them, and it was very disappointing, really. And this is one of the big questions that we've been addressing since, because everybody pretty much agreed on that VR is completely useless. They said as much as don't do it, it's a waste of time and effort, you'll be much happier if you don't, for a variety of reasons. Unfortunately, at that time, we already had the money from the Keck Foundation, so we decided to install anyways, and we did that in April 2005. And it turns out that our experience has been almost the opposite of what everybody else has been saying. It has been very positive. All of our scientists say that this is really very useful for them. They can do things in the research they have not been able to do before, or they can do things that they were able to do before, but now they can do them much quicker and so forth. So one of the big questions that we've been also addressing ever since we started this is not just making it work, but also why does it work for us when it doesn't seem to work for others? And that's going to be a big part of my talk today, just to finding out what those reasons might be and what we can do to overcome these problems. Okay, so before we can really talk about what the problems with VR, we should maybe better point out what the benefits are that we can gain from them. If there are no benefits, then obviously why bother? And we have to first start out, as I already mentioned, with a definition of what me personally actually mean when I talk about virtual reality. And I found this definition here in a dictionary online yesterday evening. I thought it's kind of funny because it doesn't really say anything. An artificial computer-generated environment presented in such a way that it feels like a real environment. And I think the most important points that this sentence doesn't quite make are that virtual reality tries to simulate real-world perception of virtual objects. So in other words, if I show you in a virtual reality environment a virtual cube, you're supposed to believe that it's actually a real cube. It just happens to be floating there in space. And what this does for us is it supports two very important techniques that we can exploit in visualization. And one of them is direct 3D perception, and the other one is 3D direct manipulation. And I'm going to explain in more detail what these are in a minute. And from a user's point of view, what it does really is it gives you the ability to immerse yourself into a computer program. As opposed to using a computer by just looking at your screen and typing on the keyboard, you have the feeling that you're inside the computer in a certain way, which can be very beneficial if it's used properly. So let's talk a bit about real-world vision, because that is really what you have to focus on very much in order to make it work. So if you forget about all the other aspects of VR that are somewhat ill-defined, then one of its big goals is to simulate the way that we see real-world three-dimensional objects. So in other words, we are trying to simulate the interaction between your eyes and the outside world in order to con you into believing that you're seeing something that is not actually there. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to replicate the images on the retina that a person would see when looking at a cube, some object that's not actually there. And what comes with this is that we're also providing full three-dimensional vision by giving people that look at these things a lot of the depth cues that also occur in the real world. And these are the depth cues that we are doing in order of sort of decreasing importance, where we have stereoscopy. Quite obviously, people have two eyes, and there's a reason for that. If you look at a three-dimensional object like this water bottle, then your left and right eye see different images of the same object, and your brain fuses these things back together and tells you it's a water bottle. Other things are parallax. As I'm moving my head around, things in the foreground seem to move differently than things in the background, so my brain also uses this cue to define how far away things are. Convergence, as I'm putting this water bottle very close to my eyes, I'm going cross-eyed, which is another important depth cue. And then, of course, perspective. If the water bottle is here, it appears to be much larger than if it's all the way over there. And the last one that we cannot simulate yet is accommodation, where the lens in your eyes also changes its focal length depending on how far away objects are. But it turns out that's not a very important depth cue. So this is all fine and good, but what do we really have to do in order to make it work? How do we pull this off, something that seems very daunting task, really? And there are two main required components. And one of them is stereoscopic display. It's kind of a no-brainer. You have to somehow provide different images to the user's two eyes. Otherwise, it's never going to look anything but an image that you're looking at. But then that only takes care of the first depth cue, stereoscopy. All the other ones are not taken care of by that. For that, we need view-dependent image generation, where the image on the computer screen is not always the same, but it is generated depending on where you actually are looking at it, which is very different from how you do things on a desktop. You can try that. If you run any 3D program and move your head around, the image won't change. And in VR, in order to make it work, it has to change. So here's a little example of what I mean when oh wow, there's a bit of ghosting on the projector, but I hope you can still see it, of what we are trying to achieve. So what we have here is on the left, we have the user's two eyes. Well, simplified representations, of course. And then here in the middle, this gray arrow is not the mouse cursor. The gray arrow is supposed to be a real-world object. And what we're doing here is I'm just simulating how the person would see that by having the light from this real-world object go through the lenses and end up on the retina, upside down, of course. And in the two eyes, we get on the right eye, we have this blue thing. On the left eye, we have the red thing, just to keep it apart. We get these two slightly different images, and all this together tells the brain that yes, there's an arrow, it's about year big and it's floating in space. Now, if the arrow is not really there, how can we still fool the person looking at it into believing that it is actually there? Well, the idea is very simple. We introduce a screen into the environment, meaning a computer display, this little, not very well visible here, this black line over there. And then what we are doing is we are projecting images of this now virtual arrow onto the screens from the point of view of the eye. So in other words, that the ray that goes from the lens to the top of the arrow goes then to the top of the image of the arrow on the screen. So we have two different images on the screen. This is where stereoscopy comes in. And now the trick is, if we take the real arrow away and just put the images in there, then if everything is done properly, the image that the observer sees on his or her retinas doesn't change at all. So in other words, we can completely fool people into believing that they see an arrow floating right here in space if there actually is no such thing. And that's the entire idea of making VR work, and it actually works surprisingly well. So after these diagrams, let's have a brief look at how that looks in real life. Here we have an actual photograph of someone, happens to be me, in our cave, looking at a model of Earth. You see it somewhat mashed here in the corner. So what happens is that I'm standing there in the middle of this cave. This is a 10 by 10 by 8 foot cube, essentially, well, box rather. And the model of the Earth is supposed to be sitting right here. But because we don't have an actual globe there, it's only on the screens, what happens is that the computer projects the image of this virtual globe onto the screen from my point of view. So you see that it ends up on the back wall, and a bit of it ends up on the left wall, and a bit of it on the bottom wall. And from the point of view of the camera that I use to take this picture, this globe looks completely squished. It doesn't look at all like a globe. And then, for comparison, if we move the viewer around, but don't change the model at all, then now the projection ends up on the right part of the screen just because I moved over to the left. Nothing else changed. And you see that it now looks squished in a slightly different way. But now comes the trick. So far, in these two images, I have generated the image on the cave based on the person's point of view. What happens if I generate the image based on the camera's point of view? In other words, pretending that the camera is the person using the VR environment. And this is what it looks like. Unfortunately, it's not the same person. I had to steal some pictures. Now what we have is the Earth is floating here. And you see, first of all, it's wonderfully spherical. And then also you notice that the image of the Earth actually goes across the border between these two screens. And the screens come together at the right angle there. But from this point of view, there's no distortion whatsoever. It just looks as if there's almost no seam. And another thing you notice here is that this red laser ray is not incidentally coming right out of Megan's hand here. That is one of the important features in there. That the computer thinks this red line is coming out of that wand she's holding. And because we are generating this image from the point of view of the camera, it actually looks as if it's coming right out there. And to really understand what this is all about, you just have to experience it for yourself. But I hope that the movies will also help a little bit of understanding what kind of difference this makes for understanding 3D data. So this is more of a technological aspect of it. How do we do this stereoscopy? How do we do this view-dependent image generation? But then the other question, of course, is why do we do it? Why do we go through all this trouble of building big projection environments that cost an awful lot of money? What are the benefits? And one of the main benefits is that, as most people believe, the human visual system is really a quite fantastic thing. And it excels really at perceiving the shape of real three-dimensional objects. If you see a water bottle, you know right away that it's a water bottle. Now, that's a bad example. We need something more complicated. I don't really see anything right now. But if you see this brown lunchbox, for example, you don't have to think about it very much. It's obviously a brown lunchbox. And if you think about it, how this works, to deduce these kind of 3D shapes just from images on your retina, it's a quite stunning thing. And it turns out it's a subconscious process, and people are not really sure if it's genetic or if it's learned in very early life. I just started reading this very exciting book called Phantoms in the Brain, which has a big section about 3D perception. And there's also lots of works by Oliver Sacks, that somewhat famous neurologist writer, who talks about that. The more I learn about it, the more exciting it becomes. So now there's one problem, of course. Humans are used to look at three-dimensional objects, but they're not really evolutionary primed to look at pictures of things, because pictures have not been around for that long. So what happens is, if you look at a photograph of a cube, you will never think that it's a cube. You'll think it's a photograph of a cube. So what happens is, your brain perceives this picture in a different way than it would perceive the actual cube. It's two different parts of the brain that do this processing. So deducting the shape of what you're looking at based on a picture is very different from deducting or perceiving the shape of what you're looking at by looking at the real thing. And the latter one, looking at pictures and trying to figure out what's going on, is not something that is either genetic or learned very early on in life. It's something that most people learn late in life, for example, when they're taking engineering classes, or they don't learn it at all. Just as an example, go to IKEA and pick up any of those building instructions, and most people will not be able to figure them out by just looking at those pictures in them. So that's a real problem, because when all that we are doing in visualization is really produce two-dimensional pictures of three-dimensional data, and then we let the users figure out what these pictures actually mean by looking at them. And that turns out to be a very slow and very cumbersome process. It would be much better to not show people pictures of the data, but to show people the data directly. And that is really what the main big benefit of VR is, that it allows us to do exactly that. As opposed to looking at a picture, you're looking at the real thing. And I hope I can pull this off. So let's see. I would like to pass around a couple of these glasses here. I don't think I have enough for everybody, so please, if you don't, just share them. And I'm going to take out my fancy ones, if I find them. Here we go. So red lens goes over the left eye. And right now, we don't need them right away. What I want to do is I want to be brave and actually show something. Okay, I hope I did this right now. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, now this is something where this is not currently where you need the glasses. This is just a good old two-dimensional image. And this is some actual data that our geologists are working with. And the question is, what is this? Again, ignore the mouse pointer, please.
Well, we have lots. Does anybody want?
Can we, let's see, can we have a show of hands of who looks at this and can tell me what this is? Seems to be I heard it. Seems to be a house. Can somebody tell me what's wrong with this house?
On the edge of the cliff.
Very good. This is very impressive. Normally, nobody figures that out. Let's change this a little bit. And now, please ignore what I'm doing behind the curtain. And let's have a look at that again in a second. Now you're seeing me digging through my code, which is something that I normally discourage when I go on a talk. But today I have to do it. All right, simulator window. Let's turn off mono, turn on anaglyphic, and run this again. Okay, and now if you put the glasses on, now everybody should see immediately what's going on. Actually, this works reasonably well, for me not even calibrating it. So now if you look at it, you should see something that you probably did not see when you looked at the image initially, and that is...
Does it work off axis?
Yes, but the more closely you are to the axis, the better it is. And there's always a sweet spot. And since I didn't configure this, I'm not really sure where the sweet spot is. Probably right around here. From here, it looks awesome. So I'm sorry about everybody else.
You know, the interesting photograph in this room is looking at all those heads with these glasses on.
Oh, yeah, that's almost like in the 50s when you go to a movie theater and watch those 3D movies. So I'm just not throwing boulders at you. I'm throwing science at you. Now, what you should be seeing, and again, if you're not sitting in the sweet spot, it might be difficult, is that this house is not just sitting on a cliff, it is actually precariously hanging over the cliff. And this is one of the examples of scientific applications that I want to go into a little bit more detail later. That is data that was generated by one of our collaborators at the USGS who went in to somewhere around the Los Angeles area where there was a major landslide about a year ago. And he was there every day taking laser scans of buildings in order to determine whether they were safe to go back in or had to be demolished. And let me turn this around a little bit. And if you look at this, now you might see that we can actually look inside the house from below the foundations, which is definitely not something that you would normally like to do. You can see, even if you look very closely, you can even see the floorboards that are sticking out there. So the foundations completely fell off, the floorboards got exposed, and this house is definitely condemned. And this is unfortunately a $1 million home, so the person who owned this was not so happy about this. But we like this data because it's really cool. So let's see. I'm going to just go back to the regular. And my main point here is that just looking at these data sets that come out of an unordered collection of points is very hard if you're doing it on a flat screen. Even the scientist who collects this data has a very, very hard time analyzing it. So that's why we're using the cave in order to do that. And it turns out that for him, he says it's just a new world. He can do things to his data that he just couldn't do before by being able to see this house sitting there, being able to touch it, being able to measure exactly how much it's sticking out over the cliff, exactly how much it is moving from day to day, and so forth. So this was all about my plug for 3D perception. But there's one more thing that is also very important but often overlooked that makes a big contribution to VR. And that is that we have 3D direct manipulation. In other words, when you're working with a 3D program on the desktop, like I just did when I moved this house around on the screen, you're limited to interacting with 2D input devices, essentially with mice, keyboard, graphics tablets, whatever you have. So in other words, to do 3D interaction with your data, you have to somehow translate these 2D interactions to 3D interactions, which is a more or less awkward process, not really all that nice. And we are going to see an example where it just doesn't work at all. And in VR, we have input devices that are fully three-dimensional. In other words, this wand that I showed you a picture of earlier is tracked by the computer in position X, Y, Z and in orientation. So I can just use it as an extension of my hand and literally touch a virtual object and pick it up, move it around, locate it from all sides, and do things to it, which means that users can pretty much ignore the way how they are normally interacting with programs, where they have to focus on how do I do it, how do I pick up this thing and move it around, but instead they can focus on what they want to do, meaning analyzing, interacting with the data. So this interaction, it is something that is not possible on the desktop, or it is very, very hard, and is really what enables new approaches that are not possible or not effective if you don't do them in VR. So what I would like to do is, because at this point none of you believes anything I'm saying, is to show a movie where some of these things are pointed out. Okay, this movie is quite long, but only the first part is interesting. This is a project that, again, it's me in the cave. This is taken with a video camera. There's no trickery involved. You're seeing exactly what the camera is seeing at this point. So you're noticing that I'm moving things around. I have these triangles there that I can pick them up with the wand, and unfortunately I'm standing in the picture. I'm very bad. And I can just use that and touch things and move them around. And what this program actually is, it's a molecular dynamics simulation, sort of, where each of these triangles represents one carbon atom in the fullerene configuration. And what I'm doing there is I'm building a buckyball by just connecting carbon atoms to form hexagons and pentagons, and now I'm adding another couple ones in order to bond them together. So what I'm doing there is I'm interacting with a real-time ongoing simulation that just lets me pick up atoms, move them around, and then in real time computes how the structure I'm building reacts to my interaction. So you see that these atoms don't really like to bond, but then if I bring them together, they snap in. And then as soon as I make this connection, you see that the sheet of carbon atoms starts folding into a ball. So if you go through this movie, let me just skip a couple of things because there's not really all that much exciting. Oops, this didn't work. Well, it doesn't really matter. It takes me about 8.5 minutes to build this buckyball. I cut out most of it, actually. And this program is one example where things just plain don't work on the desktop. I tried it many, many times. And the reason for that is that we're having this very interactive, very real-time approach where actually, at this point, you can take the glasses off again. They usually get annoying after a while. There's going to be more 3D at the end, I'm going to tell you. It turns out that it so much relies on you being able to just pick up these atoms and move them where you want to, that simulating that on a desktop is possible, but you get slowed down so much in the process that you can't do the real-time thing. In other words, you're always trying to bring these things together, but because you're so slow, you never get them to bond because they always run away from you. So this is one particular application which we just couldn't have done.
Excuse me, why do you need 3 walls? Why can't you just have 1 wall?
Oh, in principle, you can have just 1 wall. The cave is really nice because it covers your entire field of view. In other words, you're standing in there and you can look over your left shoulder, over your right shoulder, and the data can be all the way around you. It is not something that's necessary. And we have a bunch of other VR environments at IDEF that have only a single wall, that are like a drafting table, only this big. And they work exactly the same way, just you're more constrained in what you can see. So it is just a matter of trading off space against cost, essentially, which is one of the big things that I think is holding VR back, that I'm going to go into in a middle bit, that people believe you need these very expensive environments when in fact you don't. We were very lucky that we get the money to build this big one, but it is not required. And that is a very important point. I'm glad you brought that up. So let's recap. What are the benefits? The first big benefit is 3D perception, that you really see things as they are there. As I was standing in that cave and working with these carbon atoms, I didn't have to think about what I was doing. I just could touch them, move them around. It was a no-brainer. I didn't have to think about it at all. And the 3D interaction, you saw that. I could just pick up things, move them around, make connections in a way that is really very difficult otherwise. But of course, VR, all these benefits don't come for free. And there's challenges, of course, in VR. And these challenges are also a reason that hold VR back. And the one big challenge is that VR has real-time constraints. In order for 3D perception to work, you have to update whatever you're seeing on the screen at least 30 times a second, because people tend to move around subconsciously. We all do that. And if the image on the screen doesn't react to what you're doing, the 3D model you're looking at seems to wobble and people get motion sick or illusion breaks, not good. And then for 3D interaction to work, you need real-time feedback. Otherwise, you don't know what you're doing and the illusion breaks as well. But it turns out that's not as tough of a limit. As long as whatever you're doing gets reflected on the screen in less than about 1/10 of a second, you're good. So these are two things that in order to make it work in software requires special data structures, special algorithms, parallelism, high performance computers. So these are things that are not, we can't take them for granted. We have to work for them. And another challenge is that in order to realize these benefits, you have to develop approaches to interaction, to visualization, that are different from what you do normally on the desktop. So in other words, it is not possible to just take a working desktop program and port it to VR and then believe that it's going to give you any benefits, which is, again, one of the big things holding VR back. So let's talk about now why VR is being held back. I believe it's fantastic. The scientists working with us, do believe it's fantastic. Everybody else disagrees. So what's wrong? Hardly anybody in science is using VR as an actual research tool. Some people, actually many people, have VR environments, but they're typically used at the very end of the scientific process. When you have found your results, you have validated your hypothesis, you make the final picture, and then you show it to other people in order to convince them that what you did is right. So in other words, they're mostly used to display results, to communicate results, but not to generate those results in the first place. And another use that's very common is training. And there are some examples here in the automotive industry. VR environments are used to evaluate designs. The designer goes away and drafts a car, puts it in the cave or whatever they have, invites the management, they look at it, say, okay, build this. The same pretty much happens in the oil and gas industry, where that's not automotive design but drill site evaluation. And then military applications, I think everybody's seen that. These soldiers running around in a cave and pretending to shoot at things. It's mostly like a video game, so we're not really interested in that.
What about medical applications?
Medical applications, I would throw them in as scientific applications because in many ways there's very similar data that's going in, very similar questions you have. And also, VR has not made inroads into medical research at all yet. This is something that we are trying very hard to change. And I think it just will take the next generation of doctors coming out of med school, where they have been exposed to these things, to take them into daily work. I think it would be very, very powerful to use these methods for medical work, which we are doing in our lab as prototypical demonstrations all the time. But so far it hasn't happened. But I think it will work very wonderfully, actually. So as a result, VR is by most people seen as an expensive toy. It's really cool. If you bring in visitors, it wows them, but it doesn't really give you any benefits. And because it's very expensive, most people don't do it. So what are the underlying reasons for this? Why do people perceive that VR doesn't really have benefits? And the main reason is, I believe, that there's a lack of software that realizes VR's benefits. So in other words, most visualization software was initially made for the desktop, and most people just try to take the software, put it into VR, and then hope it works. And that's really all there is to it. The problem is that desktop software is not portable to VR for a variety of reasons. As I mentioned, the desktop is constrained by having a 2D display, by having a 2D input device. So the entire way how desktop software is designed is to work around these restrictions and still make it work. So a 3D desktop software, like your normal visualization software, VTK, AVS, what you have, requires special visualization methods so that you can see things in 2D. It's not bound by real-time constraints. You don't care really how long it takes to make the image. It emphasizes numerical input. For example, if you want to make an isosurface in a CAT scan, you enter the number for that isosurface. And all the interaction you do in 3D requires a mapping from those 2D devices to 3D devices. Now, if you look at VR, it's almost the exact opposite. We have 3D display, we have 3D input devices, but we don't have a keyboard. So in VR software, you should emphasize the things that are good about VR and de-emphasize the things that are bad about VR. So you should emphasize 3D perception, which you don't have on the desktop. But you do have to implement the real-time constraints. You have to de-emphasize numerical input because you don't have a keyboard. But instead, you have to emphasize direct interaction. Instead of entering the number, I would like to see the isosurface for value 15, why not just point at a point in space and say, I would like to see the ISO value that goes through this particular point. That would be a VR approach. But unfortunately, desktop software doesn't do these kind of things. So what happens is that if you take a desktop software and port it to VR, usually you get the worst of both worlds. It's really awful. Some programs use 3D interaction for numerical input. There's one example, I won't name any names, where you have to enter numbers to get your visualization done. And how do they enter numbers in the cave? They bring up a virtual keyboard and then use the 3D input device to let you put in numbers into that keyboard. Awful. Another approach is to, well, your desktop software has methods to map 2D input devices to 3D interaction. So to make it run in the cave, why not just take your 3D input device, pretend it's a 2D input device, and then use the existing methods to go back to 3D. It is awful too. And then the other things is that desktop software typically doesn't follow the real-time constraint, so users get motion sick because things are too slow. In other words, it's a shambles. This software does not really exploit VR strength at all, but it shows the weaknesses pretty clearly. And most people have been exposed to this kind of software, and that really put them off VR for good. And that's what we are trying to overcome. So how are we trying to do that? In order for VR to be accepted, we believe that there's three main things that have to be done. First of all, it has to become easy to use. We can no longer get away with having awkward interactions. We have to make full use of what the 3D allows you to do. It needs to be accessible. It is not reasonable to have one program on the desktop where you do some visualization, and then if that doesn't work for you anymore, you want to look at it in a VR environment, you have to port your data to a different format, run a different program. That's just, if that's what you have to do, nobody will do it, and that's exactly what's happening today. And then if you have a VR environment, normally there's lots of maintenance overhead. These are complicated things. They break all the time. We have been really lucky so far. But if, let's say, a scientist would have a small environment in their office because they want to do things in there, they can't afford to have a technician at hand that takes care of that thing. So we have to make it more accessible, and we have to make it more cost efficient. That's really the big knockout criterion. If people have to plunk down $500,000 for a cave, and it doesn't give them anything, they, of course, won't buy one. So we need to provide software that gives you the ability to create VR environments at a complete range of prices, starting at maybe a very low-cost one for about $10,000 or so, all the way up to the very high end. And what should happen is the software that you're using all the time should grow with what you have. In other words, if you have a very cheap environment, your software runs on it and doesn't give you as many benefits as a high-end environment, but then if you buy more stuff because you get more money, let's say, it should immediately start using these things. And it turns out that all these problems are not really hardware problems. Those have been taken care of a long time ago, but these are software problems. So we as software developers really have to think long and hard of how to do this. So now, even if you get all these things sorted out, there's still the problem that VR already has a very bad reputation, and in order to overcome that, we need more than just software that actually works. We need what software engineers like to refer to as a killer application. We need to have some things that really show these are things you couldn't do before. You need VR to do this, so go ahead and do it. And at KeckCAVES, we believe that integrating visualization directly into the scientific process is such a killer application. It is something that is very difficult otherwise. So our mission there is really to develop ways of integrating VR into particular applications from earth science, because that is our focus, but it applies to other things as well, and also the software infrastructure to support them. So that's a pretty tall order. But I think we are making inroads. This is just a nice list of what VR has been shown to be very useful for in the scientific process. For assessing the quality of your data, the fellow you're working with who generated these building scans that I showed you earlier, he's mostly using our VR environment to look at how good his data is. USGS has very stringent requirements for data quality, and he found out that he can only satisfy those requirements by using VR to look at his data. And then data exploration, of course, where you look at data and want to know what's going on. For example, looking for a tumor would be a good example. Measurements, where, again, our colleague from the USGS uses the VR environment to measure how much has this house moved over the last day. Is it safe to go back in there? And it can make very accurate measurements. And then if you're talking more about this is an observation. The first three things are more of an observation approach. The next three things are more of a simulation approach. You can use VR to develop your simulation methods, which has turned out to be very powerful. You can use it to generate your 3D models for simulations. And you can use it to explore models, for example, by playing with an ongoing simulation, like that nanotech example that I showed the movie of earlier. So these are things that we can do. And in order to really do that, we need to develop lots of software. And the most important points are that we have to develop a VR operating system that makes software portable between VR environments and the desktop, that supports developers of making good software, because currently it's just too hard to do it. We need some VR middleware, which are high-performance components that you can reuse in different programs that allow you to make things fast enough for the real-time constraints. And then most importantly, at the top level, we have to very closely collaborate between computer scientists and, in this case, earth scientists to really develop those approaches that are particular for one application. What do we need to do in order to allow you to do your simulations more effectively than you could before? And this is something that is different for everybody who's using it. So we are spending most of our time doing those things. And I'm going to hopefully be able to show some examples. Now, I'm going to skip a bunch of this because it's actually too much detail. So we have this VR operating system. And actually, you witnessed it earlier when I was showing that little demo with the point data. That was a VR program that normally runs in the cave. I just ran it on the desktop, or on my laptop rather, without any changes. So that's one thing you can do. You can just run the same programs everywhere, and it will just work, which allows you to just take your data and look at it in your office, and then you see, oh, I can't do what I need to do, so let me just go to the VR environment and run it there, and you don't have to learn a different program. You don't have to convert your data. Very useful. And then this middleware, as I mentioned, mostly deals with getting things fast. And one thing that we at IDEF are somewhat famous for is this whole multi-resolution thing. How can we deal with very large data that is actually impossible to draw at 30 times a second? How can we still do it by only showing you what you see, by only showing you what you're interested in? How can we fit a 16 gigabyte data set into a computer that only has 1 gigabyte of main memory? We are good at doing these things, and we have been developing all these approaches, and they are very useful in a variety of applications, as it turns out. And then the scientific applications, there's more than I can list on one slide, but I just want to focus on three particular ones. The nanotech construction kit you've seen in the movie is this real-time simulation where users can build molecular models of carbon, of silicate, of other things, and they can experiment with behavior. If I put on this atom, how is the overall system going to react? This is a very explorative approach. And then the 3D visualizer is a generic program to look at 3D volume data. That could be simulation data from the Earth's interior. It could be a CAT scan or an MRI scan. It doesn't really matter. And it allows you to assess the quality of this data and to explore what's going on in there. And then the LiDAR viewer, LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging, is what you've seen, which is the visualization and analysis of very high resolution laser scan data, like those houses, which is used for quality assessment and measurement. And the main reason why I put it there is I think it's the one application we have right now that has the most immediate impact on society at large, CITRIS and stuff. So to close, let me maybe just show a movie of the 3D visualizer in action, because we are running out of time. And this is a pretty good example, again, of how something is used in the cave. This is from a paper that we recently submitted, and it's me again. Working on this particular case, I'm working on a 3D data set that is a simulation of a tectonic slab subducting into the Earth's mantle. And it turned out that the scientists we are working with there are a graduate student and her advisor at UC Davis, who had a very hard time with simulating this particular data. They built the model, ran the simulations, and it just didn't converge, and they had no idea why. And actually here you're seeing how I'm moving things around, but just picking them up as if they were really there. This is, I think, a very nice view of how that's done. And so they didn't really know why it doesn't converge. They did statistical analyses, everything looked fine. And so we decided to, well, let's have a look at the data in the VR environment. And so we did that, pretty much exactly what I'm doing right now. And it turned out that the data was just, the model was bad quality. And that led to the simulation not converging. And by looking at it in 3D, it turns out we were able to very clearly see things that both the student and her advisor had not seen before, even though they had done visualization on the desktop using a regular visualization program. And they just didn't see it. For example, here we found that, here I'm zooming in, on the left going down you see the slab coming from the surface, and there's this funny bridge between the overriding plate and the slab that's not supposed to be there. That's aliasing in the data, which is something they hadn't noticed before, and here it sticks out like a sore thumb. And you also notice that one thing that is very important in these programs is the real-time feedback. As I'm putting these slices through, the image changes immediately. When I'm moving my hand, things change immediately. And that is really what makes it possible to just explore this data in a much more effective and intuitive way than it was possible before. So can I skip forward here a little bit? I want to get to the part where it's really interesting. Oh, yes, I can. All right. So we have these slices in there. Now, of course, you want to get a closer look at what's going on. So I'm changing the program a little bit. This is how we interact with menus in the VR environment. Just by pressing a button, menu pops up, you point at it, release a button. It's very easy, actually. And then we have these dialog boxes that you sometimes point at and click things on here and just getting rid of some visualization primitives. And again, I'm standing in the picture. I need a good director. And what I'm going to do now is I'm focusing in on this funny-looking area I had earlier. And these slices I put in there show me that there's something wrong, but they don't really show me the shape of what's wrong there. So by augmenting that with an isosurface, I can get a better feel for that. So I should be getting to that any second now. I'm just, again, pressing the button. I'm not entering a value of what isosurface I want to see. I'm just saying, please give me the one that goes right through here. And then you see, as I'm moving my hand, the surface changes shape immediately. And it turns out that if you think about it, principally, an isosurface is like a height line of a mountain. If you look at one height line of a mountain, you have a very hard time of getting a feel for what the mountain looks like. But by looking at many height lines, by just moving them around and seeing how they change as you go through the height values, you get a much better feel for what the real shape of this mountain is. And the same is true here. You get a much better feel for the 3D data by seeing how the surface evolves than by just looking at a fixed surface, which is something we didn't expect before, but it turns out to be one of the most powerful things in there. And now I'm doing some measurements. I want to know this little detached feature there is not supposed to be there. So I need to know exactly where it is in order to get rid of it and run the simulation again. And what I'm doing is, again, I'm touching it. And then this dialog box on the left shows me exactly what position that is at and what the data value is. 3.14 is the decadic logarithm of viscosity. And then I can export these measurements and then go back to my model generation and fix these things, which we have done in the meantime. And this was a very powerful iterative approach where you look at the data, find the problems, fix your approach, generate new data, see what things have changed, and then pretty much put the scientist into the loop in making proper data. Because this simulation method we are investigating here is a new one, so there's not really any existing art to fall back onto. We're making things up as we go along. And then it turns out to be very powerful to be able to just look at it and see what's going on, because otherwise you really have a very hard time figuring it out. Now here I'm going into another surface, and there's really not much going on, but I think it's pretty cool that we can just dive into this little hole that we have there and just fly around in there, which is something that, well, is more of a toy in this particular case. Let's see, I'm making it big, there we go, and we're going inside. So we are now going spelunking in our cave. And now normally what I would do is, of course, measure exactly where are the boundaries of this little hole we're looking at in order to get rid of it later. Okay, that's pretty much the most thing that happens there. Exploration, measurement, everything in real time. And oh, this is another bad problem we had. You see all those holes in the red surface. They are definitely not supposed to be there. And we didn't see those holes before we went into the cave. All right. Now, unfortunately, I think we're out of time. I would have loved to show a live demo of this, which is actually the next thing on my list. But if some of you might be able to stick around, we can do that offline. Apart from that, I'd like to just wrap up what we have talked about. So I hope to convince you that VR offers many benefits for visualization, and for research especially, due to the ability to interact naturally with 3D data, especially complex, large, time-varying data, by supporting 3D perception and 3D manipulation, which are the most important benefits that you get from VR, and the interactivity that comes with it. Unfortunately, VR, everybody else believes it's crap, and we believe it's not. And we have focused on particular approaches to doing VR that seems to work, where we are focusing on the strengths, de-emphasizing the drawbacks, building good software, and closely collaborating with the scientists. And it turns out that the feedback we have gotten from scientists is very, very positive. The ones who are working directly with us are very enthusiastic. They use it all the time. They go into the basement in geology to look at the data, go back to their office, change their model, go back down, and so forth. And also, interestingly enough, many visitors, we have had many visitors in the year that we've been up and running, they come in believing that it's not going to be exciting. They say, yeah, I've seen VR, I know it doesn't work, and they go out and believe very different things. So we believe that we are doing something right, and we are trying to tell as many other people about it as possible in order to really make VR an integral part of science, which I think it ought to be because it just offers great benefits that need to be realized. And one of the things that I want to point out is that we're not doing this just for us. Everything we're doing is going to be released to the community at large. Due to our infrastructure, the software runs pretty much everywhere. On my laptop, in our cave, in all the VR environments we have at IDEF in Davis. It's currently being used at the Desert Research Institute in Reno. We just installed at the State University of New York, Stony Brook, where they just are getting a cave as we speak. I have a student currently in Germany at the University of Kaiserslautern installing it there for some other applications. So everybody can use it. Just download it from the webpage, not right now, but hopefully very soon, and just go with it. So these combinations of having this portable software that allows you to just incrementally buy new things for your existing visualization centers and then use them immediately, and these applications that are very problem-specific, I think is really going to make an impact. And I would also extend an invitation. If you still have doubts, and I bet you do, then please have a look at our webpage where you can see all those movies that are showed. You can just download them, and there's a bunch more. There's descriptions of the projects we are doing. There will be very soon the pages where you can download the software. Or, of course, even better, just come visit us at UC Davis. If you really want to see how it works, you have to try it yourself in the cave. It's very different from even looking at the movies. So take us up on that. And, of course, I have to acknowledge the usual suspects. All of this work would not have been possible without these two institutions, the Keck Center for Active Visualization of the Earth Scientists, KeckCAVES, which employs me mostly, and, well, KeckCAVES logo. And then, of course, the computer science parts, the Institute for Data Analysis and Visualization, that logo, which used to employ me, and where we are doing most of the software development for KeckCAVES collaboration. And, of course, the W.M. Keck Foundation, who footed the bill to build this cave, which turns out to be not so much important because it is the VR environment, but it is very important. It's a crystallization point. People come together there and talk and develop approaches. And I don't think it would have happened if we wouldn't have this very fancy, very expensive environment. So they're not required, but if you have them, they're really helpful in many, many ways. All right. So if we have time for some questions and answers, I would be happy to do so. I have nothing else planned for this afternoon. And otherwise, I would like to thank you for bearing with me and waiting until I finally arrived. And bearing with me for running long. Thank you very much.
Let me first ask that if you have these glasses, perhaps you want these back, right?
That would be perfect. You can also keep a couple
just,
if you want to.
leave
but
them
otherwise,
on the table here, we'll
if you
we'll
don't want
gather
to keep them,
at the
just give them back to me.
Yeah, that was great. One question here, and for the benefit of our video audience, perhaps you could just say it in here.
Yeah. So one of the killer applications that I could see, and we are sort of, are very interested in this, as you know, is cellular tomography. So there is a situation where the complexity of the cell almost requires that you have to go this way. There's no other way you can go in this. And if you have even if a three-dimensional cellular volume, you cannot comprehend that volume, but just from looking from the outside, you have to walk through this. One thing I've been sort of missing from your presentation, which was wonderful, is the idea of segmentation on the fly. And I think that is a really important aspect of it, because exploration only takes you this far. What you really need to do is to be able, in your volume, go in there, click on the kind of volumes that you would like to keep, and just ignore everything else.
Yes.
And I know you guys are working on this, and
yes.
We collaborate on this. But I really think that could be the killer application that catapults it into the mainstream of biology.
No, that is a very good point. And the reason why I didn't explicitly mention is that for me, that is subsumed in exploration in many ways. So it is somewhat on the borderline between just exploration by purely looking at things, but when we do exploration from our point of view, it always also involves manipulating the data in certain ways. So for example, what I did to that buckyball model in this movie, I would also call that exploration. And what you're saying, the segmentation, is the project that you have been working on with Oliver and Jeff, is exactly also part of that. So yes, this is a very important thing, and this is one of the applications that I think is going to make a very big impact.
And it's going to be quantitative analysis.
Yes.
So, that's link that together.
Absolutely. No, this fits perfectly with our mission. It is just not earth science enough for me to mention in this talk, but you know that we're working on that. And no, I think that's going to be one of the things. I mean, it goes into medical, biology. There are all these applications we are not directly involved in because it's not earth science, but our software can also be applied to all those things. I mean, we are regularly looking at CAT scans. One of our scientists recently had a herniated disc, and we have put her MRI in there to look at it. So we do these things. It's just we don't talk about them too much.
If there's no other question, I have one question, and it is like, in order to make this work for for us mortals, is we need to have a ballpark number of how much it's going to cost us to do that. So, is a G5 Mac enough to run everything? And what are the hardware requirements, and how easy would it for us to just do it?
That is, I should have addressed it in the talk more, and I think I skipped over a bit of that. I am always surprised myself by how scalable this stuff is, because I didn't go into too much how we develop the software, but it is developed on a timer base. In other words, we always only do the amount of work we can do in a given time. So it turns out if you have a very slow machine, you still get all the benefits of interactivity, you just don't get as much work done. Recently, we did a user study just to see how effective our software actually is, where we compared running a standard desktop visualization system against our 3D visualizer. I showed the movie in the cave and the 3D visualizer running on the desktop to have a fair comparison. We ran those experiments on a $900 MacBook. Worked like a charm. Normally, if you want to have something that is more immersive than a 13-inch MacBook, you would have to buy, let's see, if you really want to go VR with stereo and big screen and all, you probably have to spend around $10,000 for a projector, a computer, a screen, some glasses. And for that, you get a full VR environment. You not just get a big screen, you get head tracking and everything. I spec'd it out just a couple of weeks ago. It should be about $10,000. For about $20,000, you can get a bigger screen, and then you can really go completely smoothly all the way up to $500,000 for having a real cave. Or if you want to spend like crazy, you can build the entire building and put a 6-sided cave in there, which I don't recommend doing, which will cost you a couple $1 million, but you shouldn't do that. So in other words, really anything between a MacBook and $500,000 for a cave works in some fashion. The more money you put in, the more you get out of it. But there's no hard and fast, you need this in order to make it run. 10,000 will work for you. We took our show on the road just a couple of weeks ago to a workshop in Santa Barbara where we took a computer, just one of our regular workstations. We took a stereo projector, $3,000, and I took a tracking system, which was a bit aiming too much. And everything I had in my hand was about $10,000. And we put it together in 20 minutes in a conference room and put up a VR demo with head tracking, stereo, everything. It worked. So yeah, $10,000 is really all you need for fully immersive VR.
I was curious what projectors you use, because the stereo projectors that sync with the refresh with the glasses, those are generally in the $30,000 range.
Actually, they're much more than that.
Yeah.
They used to be. For the cave, we are using those high-end projectors you're referring to. These are 3-chip DLP projectors that are especially changed by the manufacturer to be able to switch between two completely different images at 100 times a second, which we need for this shuttered stereo. They are actually $70,000 a piece. Embarrassingly enough. As it turns out, there's this little garage company that just recently took a regular desktop DLP projector and tweaked it to make it run in stereo, and we just bought one of those. They're a little bit smaller than that one there, about yay big, and they are $3,000, and they do active stereo with the shutter glasses. And it works marvelously. They're really good image quality. Not very high resolution, but it works. That was the one we took to that workshop I just mentioned. Then another option for doing it is by using 2 projectors instead of 1, and then generate the left-right eye images using either one. And for that, you can use any old desktop projector. So it's probably going to be around $5,000, $6,000 for a pair of projectors. So there's a lot of options. You can do stereo in many, many different ways. And our software so far has run on all of them. So we can really tell which ones work best. And we believe that active stereo, meaning the time interlace, works best, but it is a bit more costly. 2 projector stereo works very well as well. There's some drawbacks to it, but it's not a fundamental drawback. Even anaglyphic stereo using red-blue glasses works reasonably well. We have a tile display wall in our lab that is old, that is just 4 screens. It's about 10 by 8 foot, that doesn't do stereo. But with anaglyphic, you can use it as a VR environment. You get a headache after 2 hours, but don't use it for that long. And it's very, very low cost because it doesn't even do stereo. So there's, again, a whole range of things. Hardware has developed so much in the last years, it's wonderful for us VR people. Because it used to be that the hardware was a constraining factor. Now the software is a constraining factor. To actually use all those things you can now afford. And we are hopefully making good progress in that regard.
Other questions? Oliver, thanks very much. It was a very interesting talk.
Thank you.